Welcome back to another episode of the New Levels Coaching Podcast. As always, I am your host, former international athlete turned coach Lewis Moses and founder here at NLC. This week, for a bonus episode, I'm joined by our head of coaching, Jethro McGraw. Welcome back, Jeth. It's been a while.
Do you know, I was actually just thinking it has been a long time, and I dread to think how many podcast episodes we've done now. But yeah, it has been a while, and good to be back.
Yeah, well, I think we're now 28 in. And the last one we did together, I think we might have been with Gemma, yourself, and me when we did our
just
coaching
before Christmas, right?
Yeah.
Just before Christmas, end of 23.
Yeah. Well, we've been flying, and it was Jethro's suggestion to do our podcast episodes bi-weekly, so we have them every other week. But this week, we've brought you a bonus episode, and I've dragged him back in because we're going to do a bonus one. I thought I'll drag the person in whose idea it was to split it up. But it is a very special episode because this weekend, we're taking a look ahead to the European Trail and Mountain Running Championships, which are going to go ahead in Annecy in France. And the reason we've done this as a bonus episode is because we have two New Levels Coaching athletes going out there to represent Team GB. And this is the very first time we've had senior international athletes who've come through the New Levels Coaching framework that have gone on to represent their country at senior level. We've always celebrated the success of our Masters athletes who've gone on, and a lot of them have brought back medals from those Masters Championships, and they've represented Great Britain out there. Numerous Masters Championships now, whether that's European or Worlds, but this is the first time we've had people selected as part of a selection process to represent Team GB and Northern Ireland. So we're very, very proud, and we want to look ahead to that, celebrate their success, but also celebrate the success here at New Levels Coaching. The reason I brought Jethro in is because Jethro and I both had athletes out there, one each in two different races. So we'll have a look at those and the athletes who are traveling out there. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to kick off, Jeth. I've said this is something new I'm putting into the podcast. So I know our listeners are thinking, oh God, what's new about it? Well, hold your breath, because every week I'm now going to ask our guests to name one of their coaching positives from the last couple of weeks or since they were last on the podcast. If they're not a coach, I'll ask them to name one of the positives from their industry that they've been working in. It's something we do at New Levels Coaching every one of our team meetings, and we also do in our coaches meeting. So I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit, Jethro. Can you give me a coaching positive to kick off this week's pod?
Hey, look, no, I'm really excited for the weekend coming up, and I think we should reflect and say it is massive for New Levels, and particularly for James and Georgia going out there representing Great Britain, and New Levels out there. So that is super exciting. But I suppose as a recent coaching positive, I think the last couple of weeks, lots of you are aware the track season has really kind of got going, and a lot of those early season races have happened. And it's just been really awesome to see so many of the athletes that I'm working with, particularly over that 1,500 metre distance. Really impressed with the performances and times that they're running early doors, and that's everyone from my Masters athletes up in the northeast and West Wales to my university guys competing up in Manchester and over across in Europe in Belgium across the weekend. So yeah, it's been a really positive start to the season. And yeah, whilst my attention was fully on the track this last weekend, fully on the fell this weekend. So yeah, that's really cool.
And you were on kind of the fells at the weekend as well, because you got a bit of camping in as well, didn't you?
Yeah, it was my first pitch of the year, so yeah, nice. It was excellent.
Jethro, well, you haven't had the weather, but thankfully you had a bit better weather this weekend because he does like his camping.
Just good enough.
Just good enough. That's about as good as it's got this summer. I think it's a really good starting point though, because it shows the array of people we're working with here at New Levels, and in different parts of the country, like you say, Wales, from the northeast, the different age ranges that we work with. We have Masters athletes, and you work with a Masters athlete now, Chris, who's competing right at the highest level in his age group, up in the M70 category now, and right the way down to junior athletes who we're going to talk about in just a second, who are going out at under 20 age group level. So working with a wide variety of ages, which is challenging for us as coaches, but brilliant for our development. And that's a starting point there. I'm going to quickly touch on two positives, because the one joint positive from us
positives.
Both.
Wow.
Well, one I'm throwing there in the joint because we did the NLC training camp to Portugal recently, which was fantastic. And if you joined us out there, you'll know what I'm saying here, in the sense We had a barrel of laughs and we had some great training sessions. We had beautiful weather over there in the Algarve. We are going to do that trip again next year for our NLC community. So if people are coached by NLC or part of the New Levels Run Club, then they'll be welcome to come to that in Portugal. It's a fantastic location. Jethro, you organised a brilliant trip, so thank you for that. I thought it was fantastic from start to finish. So that was one of my coaching positives, being part of that experience. But also on Friday, Gemma did a great job at bringing together our Friday night track nights now, the coaching clinics. We had 56.
Track party.
It was a track party. It was. It certainly was. 56 people, 60 including coaching team there at Loughborough University, which shows how our community is growing. And we had 4 of our coaches there. Matt Long, who's a regular on the podcast, Kirsty, who's been on the podcast before, and Gemma and myself were there. And we got the weather, and it was just brilliant, and some really good, some good coaching, but some better execution from the athletes. So all around positives to share and start the pod today. So to get into things though, we're going to talk all things trail and mountain, which I know we touch on quite a bit on the podcast, particularly with Gemma and James, who I coach. But a lot of people sometimes don't know where to start with trail and mountain. It's very different to the things, but it is a growing market and it's very popular and more people are trying it. Our Peaks camp this year in the Peak District, Jethro, you came last year. We had 13, 14 people on that last year. We've now got 33, I believe, on it this year. So it kind of goes to show where that market's going. So we're going to enlighten people around the coaching elements of that. It's fair to say, has that been a new kind of area for you as well as a coach, coming from a track background, one that you've been exploring with some of your athletes?
Yeah, definitely. It's been a really, really good journey, and it's been nice because, I've been working with Georgia now for a good amount of time and spent time with her working towards goals over more familiar distances, whether that, and for me, that's more road, cross country and track. So, ultimately it's been nice to guide her through that journey, but then also switch our attention and find some real specificity and how we can approach the fells and make the most of, she was quite clear at the start of the year that her big objective was to make this team, and she has done so. So it's been really exciting, and I think that's what's been great being in like this New Levels environment, is that we've got a lot of coaches that are super passionate, open, curious about the trail running side of things. And, if you're honest as well, certainly yourself and Jem's background, you've come from that track and road background as well. So it's very applicable and certainly for probably a lot of athletes looking to turn to the trails, it's a similar kind of journey. I know that wasn't necessarily the same with James, but it's been a great learning curve.
Yeah, so Georgia, who Jethro is referring to, has made the junior up and down team for this weekend in Annecy. And to give you a bit of an insight into the structure of the weekend, so the GB team are going out there to compete against the best in Europe. They're out there from actually today. They're starting to arrive all through the weekend, and it's part of the maxi race set up over there in Annecy. So I actually coached a girl last year who a lot of our NLC community will be familiar with. So Martha, who does a massage for us in Morzine. Martha was competing at the Annecy race last year, and now this year, so the maxi race, every year they have a surprise race, which is quite cool, and they throw in something into the program. And this year they said, well, what we're going to do is our surprise race is we're going to actually do the European Trail Running Championships as our surprise race. So the surprise race is the race that James is participating in on the Saturday, and then the mass participants get the option to do that on the Sunday. So they can go and support that race on the Saturday, watch the best in Europe come together. So that's the men's and women's senior trail running championships. And that's 58 kilometres, 3,500 metres worth of vertical gain, which is, a lot. And then they will participate on that on the Sunday. There's a whole host of races. Some are longer than that, some are shorter than that. But within that, we also have the uphill race, which is exactly what it says on the tin. It's up a hill and it's short, sharp, and it is very, very tough. It's usually around about 6-7k in distance, and then it's just, that's for seniors. Juniors a little bit shorter, and it's straight up, and that's a tough event. And then we have the up and down race, which is the one Georgia is in the junior race. I believe they've got about 400 metres of climbing. Is that about right,
Yeah,
Jeff?
It doesn't sound very much compared to what James has taken on over that 58k, right? But yeah, we're talking, it's about 6k, just under, and around 400 metres of elevation up, but then they've also got to get back down. The interesting thing about the Annecy course, particularly for that up and down race, is that the final kilometre is pancake flat.
Interesting.
Which I think we'll talk a little bit about later about maybe how training's been tailored towards really taking on that final piece. So yeah, effectively you're talking 5K with 400 meters of elevation up and down. So averaging out around sort of 13-14%.
So this is the fascinating bit, because like you say, 400 meters doesn't sound that much, does it? People think, 400 meters, but you think about it, 400 meters up in just over 6K, just under 7K, that distance, like that is crazy. You're climbing just under 100 meters every kilometer, which is, serious climbing. The good thing is about the up and down, which is slightly different to the up, because I went to watch the uphill trial in Keswick. I participated in the up and down on the Sunday, but the uphill I went to spectate. And the difficulty with that is the runners run all the way to the top. They finish the race up there, and then they've got to find their way down. At least in the up and down, they come back down. But it is brutal. It really is, and it's a really tough event, and one that you shouldn't underestimate. But training for it, as you say, Jethro, it has to be very specific. It's a very specific type of event. I guess we can start off there and say, well, what are the specific demands of it? What do we look for when it comes to coaching? So let's start with the time aspect. Let's break it down here as coaches. Time-wise, what are we looking at there for Georgia? What are we roughly thinking she'll be out for? What was she out for in the Lakes when she did the trial race?
Yeah, great question. So the trial race was up in the Lakes was actually slightly longer. It was around 6.5K, but she was out running for around that 35-minute mark, which 36 minutes equates nicely to probably what she'd expect to run over a flat 10K. So that's quite a nice time frame, and probably something that is kind of probably quite relatable to lots of people listening in terms of that it's that 10K type of effort. Albeit with a lot of elevation in the middle, but yeah, it's calibrating that distance and elevation to something a bit more tangible.
So that's a great starting point there, because like you say, most people are going to be able to relate to this. I like to work in time and in intensities. So let's say 30 to 40 minutes for everybody. If we let's take Dave's physiology hat on, Dave, our resident physiologist here. He'd be saying, well, an effort you can sustain for 30 to sort of 45 minutes is right up at the sort of lactate turn point 2 if we were doing a threshold test and we were looking at those lactate levels. So we look at that and say, right, for a lot of our runners who we coach, that might fall somewhere between or in and around 10K sort of distance. But then is it a case of, do we train Georgia for just 10K because her profile fits within that? Like, how are you then breaking that down, thinking, 35 minutes, it's just 10K, right?
Yeah, well, that's the thing. It's not just 35 minutes, right? And actually, you've got to half that and realise that for at least half of that 35 minutes, probably a little bit more, you're probably talking maybe like 22 minutes of that was high heart rate, working very hard, going up. And then it's that final 10 to 15 minutes, if you like, where it's more of the technical, running quite fast downhill. And so actually, in terms of probably where your heart rate profile is, it's going to be much, much higher than you'd normally expect to get in a 10K race on the uphill section. And then actually, I suspect it's definitely more of a physical or a technical limit on the how fast you can go down the hill, less of a physiological. So you wouldn't necessarily expect heart rates on those really steep downhill sections to get as high as you might expect on the uphill.
And people will be sat at home thinking, well, why is that the case? Because you're increasing speed coming down, you're going slower on the way up, you're going faster on the way down, surely heart rate's going to go up. But when you know the technical aspects of the trails, you'll realise there's only a certain speed you can go and descend at. Yeah. But also it's easier, like certainly on your cardiovascular system, to be descending than it is climbing. So yes, there's some muscle damage that goes on there, particularly with the eccentric loading on the downhill aspects of the course. But as you've quite rightly pointed out, and he's like one of the things that hopefully people start to learn about at home, on the way up, you're probably going to be slightly above that lactate threshold 2, and certainly for the time frame we're looking at there, sort of 15 minutes.
Definitely.
Or there's going to be elements of it that are going to spike on some of the steeper sections. But then on the way down, the heart rate might actually drop a little bit. And then that leads us nicely into, well, we've got this nice flat section at the end as well.
Yeah.
So what's going through your mind there as a coach? Because you mentioned it to me and said, oh, this is interesting. Look at that.
Yeah, no, it is really interesting. And I think that was, for us, it was all part of the decision making as well. Obviously, there was the option. Across the trial race was across 2 races, right? It was the uphill only and the up and down. And I think ultimately we decided, well, which event is going to play to our strengths the most. And it is going to be that up and down, because actually, you know, the athlete that I'm working with has got real pedigree over the flat, the road, the track, even cross country being relatively flat as well. And so actually I see it as it's a big advantage that there's that K section at the end. However, there's going to be there's a real skill element to being able to run very fast on very fatigued, very damaged legs, right? It's almost probably almost like a brick run in triathlon, right? And that's practice, because there's a huge amount of muscle damage there, and there's almost like a skill to being able to get the most out of yourself on that final run section. So it comes down to specificity, right? And I think things to note is that the trial race didn't have a 1 kilometre flat section at the end up in Keswick. So it was a very different race in terms of the way that we've prepped for it. But there's been a nice, 4, 5, 6 week period in between the two, which has allowed us to go into a bit more detail as to trying to replicate what that feeling might feel like.
Well, I saw Georgia at that trial race, and you're right, it wasn't a flat section, because I remember it well. There was a nice descent into the park that we finished in, and I was flying down that descent and making up a lot of ground. And then there was just this nice little kicker of a hill to finish up the hill, and I went into full leg cramp as I went up that hill. It was just a little, do you know when you just see it and you think, oh, okay, I'm going to drive now. I was like, oh no, nothing left in the body. But yeah, you're right, it was a lot different profile. That's a really good point, though, about playing to your athlete's strengths. So I'm going to go into the decision making around what we did with James here.
Yeah, I was going to say.
Yeah, the trail race for James and the trial race for James wasn't that weekend. There were trials. There was a trial for the uphill, and there's a trial for the up and down. Now, if I'm being brutally honest, the course that probably suited James the best was the up and down. However, he had a big work day that day. It wasn't possible for him to do that event. He may have been able to shift it around if we really wanted to. But we knew his best chance stood in the longer race, which is the one he's now competing in. And there wasn't a specific trial race for that. So it was showing form from last year over similar distances, which he'd done. He'd performed really well at Wild Strubel and Cullinan. So that had put him in the frame. And then he was due to go to Trans Gran Canaria and race out there, which they were going to consider that as part of their selection process. Unfortunately, he had a bit of an Achilles issue. He decided not to do it. So he was selected as reserve because he hadn't really shown current form. But back to your point, he had done a cross country before that, and he ran really well. He won his county cross country, so that showed a little bit of form. And then more recently, he went to UTS, even when he was still reserve, and did a shorter race, which showed them, yes, he is in good form. He won there. He actually beat another member of the team there who was also doing the shorter race. So when Tom Evans unfortunately dropped out due to injury, it was probably an easy decision for them to say, well, James is in good nick. However, what I did do as a coach is I put James in the uphill trial, as I did with Gemma, up at Skiddaw on the Friday night, knowing it wasn't really their strength, and finding out a lot about them, and also giving me a lot of information as a coach. We knew climbing is not their weak points, but it's something they both need to work on. Felt like Gemma was relatively better at climbing than James, relative. Not saying that Gemma would beat James, it's not that, but relative to their category, their gender. However, I didn't probably appreciate how far back they were, but it gave me a really good insight into, right, there's a lot of work to do. We knew there was a lot of work, but now we've really got to improve the climbing. So we purposely planned out their year to do that trial, knowing that they weren't really going to be in the best place to qualify. Slightly different approach to you were looking at it with Georgia, thinking, right, this is a big goal for her. She wants to make this team, where it wasn't really a big goal for them too. So it shows that importance of planning from quite a way out, doesn't it? And having that discussion about goal setting with your athletes.
Absolutely. And I'd say it's slightly different because obviously with the difference in like durations or like length of the event that they're both undertaking, because quite clearly there's like it's much more difficult to balance that specificity for somebody that's going and embarking on a 58k charge through on at the Europeans, right? Whereas actually the fact that George is out there running for a relatively short amount of time, it means that we can build in a lot of that track work, a lot of that road work, which is also going to be useful for the rest of a summer because she's got goals over those distances as well. So it is a challenge, and it is like, you've really got to question yourself about what's going to be most important for those most important goals. But ultimately, as long as you've got all that preparation in advance, you can build something around it and really microdose and make the most of the various training elements that you're including in that training.
And that's part of the puzzle, isn't it? We go back to that podcast episode we did right at the start where you spoke about A goals, B goals, C goals with races and planning that out. And it's so important because it's easy to get tied into everything and you can't specialise in everything. But those different disciplines can complement one another as well. Yeah. And I think that's been a big part of certainly George's build-up, hasn't it? I know she went on cross-country and, she wants to go on the track in the summer, and I'm sure, she'll go back to mountains eventually, but there's these aspirations elsewhere as well.
No, definitely. It's been a really successful season for her over the cross-country, sort of second in the Northern cross-country, won the Northern Road 5K. So actually there's a real load of pure physical prowess there in the same way as, Gemma before the uphill race went and ran a 5k PB, right?
Yeah,
so there's a high amount of applicability to those distances, but it's that layer of specificity that's going to be really, really important. And the direction of training certainly changed from that cross country build to more of a focus on the mountain trial. Fortunate as well, they're based up in the Lake District, and so actually in terms of access to the types of gradients or the types of terrain that you might expect to find at both the trial race and in Annecy at the weekend, actually there's a fair bit of natural specificity there, which I think, if we're honest, is quite useful. And
Definitely.
Even the best in the world are
100%.
moving to to operate out of the Alps, to prepare for these like really big trail races. But it's certainly an advantage. Let's say if you're based in Norfolk, you probably are a little bit at a disadvantage. And I know that James really utilises the Peak District to accumulate a lot of his training. So I suppose that was going to be my question to you, because I think certainly the big challenge I see is, well, if specificity is king, how difficult is it to get that into James's training when actually, it's fairly impossible to replicate the kind of intensity or like technical competency of through a 58k race. What strategies are you looking for there, and what's been successful in the past and worked during this block especially well?
Yeah, it's a great question. So the first thing is we do a lot on the up, a lot of hills. How do we do that? We either do that artificially on a treadmill, or we do it in natural environments. He's got a woods called Bourne Woods close to him, that if he keeps going up and down and round and round, he can get quite a lot of elevation there. Okay. We're talking in an easy run, he can go and grab 500, 600 meters within an easy run. So that's good. The long run last week, he had 4 hours. He went over to Box Hill over in the Surrey Hills, and that has steps in where he has to do a bit of power hiking. Again, we're looking for that specificity where we know he's going to be doing some hiking this weekend within the 58k. The Peak District, when we can, utilising races like Snowdonia, if we can do that. Long term, not just for this race, but we're off to Chamonix in the middle of June for a training camp. Then we've got the Mausian retreat. We'll do a bit more there. And then we're going back out to the mountains, but he's also going to race in Verbier whilst we're out there. So it's being clever about the planning long term and making sure we've got that specificity in there. But then really, if I'm being honest, it's looking at the treadmill as a really useful tool. I was on there myself earlier on in the week because I'm doing a bit more in the mountains these days, and it is tough on there. Like it's really tough. What I also like about it, which I would say is an underrated aspect of the treadmill, it gets really hot on there.
Yeah.
And a lot of these mountain races take place in the middle of the summer where it's warm. So there is that like little bit of heat acclimation going on and getting used to being warm and, you know, fueling whilst you're on there with hydration and that type of stuff. But ultimately we can dictate the gradient, we can make sure they're getting that elevation in, and we can also then dictate the speed at which they're climbing as well. So that's the way we've done it with James so far. We're starting to see progress, but I also know the importance of when you've not grown up in that environment, like someone like Georgia, back to her, or you've not grown up in the Alps, it's going to take you longer to catch up. It's going to take you a couple of years to build that strength. It's not just going to come all at once, and we can't just throw everything in there at once either, because that's a danger. And I think that's probably what happened with the Achilles issue, is that we just added a little bit too much too soon, and it wasn't quite ready for it, and it just said to us, you know, back off. And now it's good, it's, you know, it's adapted and it's now stronger. But I think when you try to do too much too soon, you can come unstuck, and, you know, you've just got to be careful with that as well.
No, great answer. That's really, really useful. And yeah, I know in particular, you know, spoke a lot about that, you know, treadmill sessions and how useful they're going to be. Do you want to talk specifically about the conditions that we might expect at the weekend? Right, you know, I think we are definitely expecting it to be much warmer than it was at the Lakes Trial, and that's, you know, that's certainly going to play a part. Also, in terms of the type of surface that they're going to be running on, again, it is going to be quite different to the Lake District. The up and down race, for example, was it'd be wrong for me to call it a moor, but, you know, there's definitely sections that were more like, you know, grassy, muddy stone sections where it's probably going to be a lot harder out there, and, you know, probably a lot more kind of loose rock. And, you know, it's particularly important when you're technically descending and looking to try and get an edge over your competitors, that you're aware of that and you're comfortable, you know, running at, let's be honest, like really high speed at those types of obstacles. Yeah, I don't know what. Obviously, the treadmill's useful, but you can't necessarily get those technical bits of input. Is that something that you've sought out individually with James?
Yeah, so again, obviously with James being drafted in last minute, this wasn't like a big air race goal for him, but with useful, we had things like Snowdonia. So when he raced Snowdonia, he then stayed up there the day after to do another run there, because it is that rocky terrain. I'd say the biggest difference, and I'm sure you'd agree, Jeth, is that I see our fells as, like you say, that grassy, rocky, muddy type surface. Yep. The best way to describe what I'd class as the mountains over in the place like France and the Alps is they're more alpine terrain. So we get like almost the pine needles on the floor, can be beautiful surface at times, very runnable. You get big service roads because obviously, you know, a lot of them are ski resorts, and some of them you're even running up ski slopes at certain points. But you also get like that loose rock, as you say, where you get a little bit of that in places like Snowdonia, but it's more like scree type rock. Whereas over there, it's a bit bigger. So it's really tricky to replicate. But again, you just got to be a little bit clever with it. And I guess for Georgia, in your case, there is some elements up in the lakes where you can go and grab that sort of terrain, or certainly try and replicate it.
Yeah, no, it's a bit of a strategy that we've used during this block is to combine probably the most familiar training locations. So, you know, a hill or a mountain that she knows really, really well, and, you know, go back to there time and time again, you know, gradually progressing those type of sessions on a very familiar terrain, because I think that's really important. But then also mixing it up and, you know, perhaps saying, you know, giving quite clear instructions, please take yourself off for a unstructured long run where on each of the down sections, I just want you to put an extra bit of effort in. And it's an unknown place. You're perhaps taking on unknown terrain at that point, but you are just looking to, you know, technically push what you feel comfortable to do. And I think that's going to be really important, because ultimately, you know, it doesn't matter how well you prep for and what you think the terrain's going to be like. It's unknown, right? It's always going to be unknown, and that's the beauty of trail. So I think that nice combination of like familiarity and getting really good specific sessions done there, but also, you know, that introduction of a bit of, a bit of unknown, and almost like reducing maybe potentially that fear of taking on certain obstacles or certain bits of terrain. I think that's worked quite well so far.
Or features as they're known. Features as they're known in the new levels coaching training
it's
world.
Probably not obstacles.
It is obstacles, yeah. But you used the term features on the cross-country course in Portugal, which went down so well. Everyone loved it. Yeah, just those features. Just, those big mounds that you got to run over. We'll call them features.
It's just a 10K with features, right? Yeah. That's all trail is.
It sounds a little bit better, doesn't it? A little bit more appealing. I think it's a really good point you make about, putting them in the unknown, because you've got there, I think it's clever coaching, and whether it's done intentionally, I'm sure it was. But you've got the repetitive element, which teaches people the technical aspects of it, like running downhill, running uphill in comfortable environments, which and by doing that, you become better at the skill that you want to be good at. You become better with the technical elements of descending, and that's really important. If you've got your skill nailed down, you can then apply that to any type of terrain. But then you're saying, now go and apply that skill that you've learned and that you're really good at to unknown environments.
Definitely.
And that's what racing is, because you can't go and recce every course. You can't go and know every single step. Like with OCC later on in the year for James particularly, OCC is the 50k event at UTMB. We are going to go out there and we are going to recce as much as the course we possibly can, which is great. But then conditions could change on the day. Yep. And all of a sudden that course feels a lot different to what it was. So that you've practiced the skills, and then it's, as you say, it's about trusting yourself to be able to push yourself a little bit more than you're comfortable with to test that skill on that unknown environment. So I think it's very, very clever coaching. So well done, mate. That's quality. That's high quality coaching right there.
Kudos from the boss. Kudos from the boss. No, it's a good point about course recce. Again, just reflecting back to the trial, but we did do one course recce, but we didn't actually run it. We actually they just went up and hiked it. And I felt that was really important, because actually the time period that we had to go and recce, it was late winter really, and so the conditions miserable, right? And actually,
good point.
You're right. Going up there, it was more kind of felt like more mud was kind of the prevailing thing up there. Whereas actually by the time that it got to late Easter, it had dried out a little bit, and so it was quite different. And also I think if you're particularly a course like that, if you're not going to approach it at a race type effort, potentially could be quite demoralizing, because I think a lot of trail racing is about sort of running with real guts and trusting in your rhythm, your process, rather than psyching yourself out around, this is really tough and I'm not sure whether I can do this at all. So it's trusting in your training, trusting in that process, and finding that rhythm that works for you, based on what you've come to within your training.
Some really good takeaways there as well for people who are maybe thinking about going to trails. Like, if you can course recce, great, go there and do that. If you can't, but you know what the type of terrain is, can you start to replicate that terrain in training? Can you get on similar ground? Can you be practicing those skills in a repetitive environment, particularly descending, which a lot of people aren't comfortable with, getting better at the actual skill. It's something that I'm working on a lot with Gemma at the minute, and she's improving drastically with it, which is great. But loads of learnings for people to take away that maybe a little bit scared to go to the trails. Like, it's fun, it's a great environment to be in, and there's loads of ways in which you can upskill, and you can get some quick wins with like a lot of low hanging fruit there as well, because quite often it's a new event for a lot of people. The final thing we'll talk on here is like the conditions they might face. Like you say, the weather. Thankfully, at one point, I don't know if you saw it, looked like it was going to be a heat wave, and I was like, my God. But thankfully that's dropped down, but they are still going to get warmer temperatures, but there might be some drizzle there, which would be quite nice for the runners. But they are looking at sort of 21 degrees, which
muggy,
now,
isn't it?
It's muggy, yeah. And I think it's probably going to affect, it will affect the longer runners more, of course.
Yeah, definitely.
So like things for us that we're considering, like if it does get a little bit warmer, is things like ice bandanas, particularly at the start, ice towels to make sure the core temperature is as low as possible, or certainly that perception is. Not being afraid to dip the hat into like cold water, putting cold water on the neck and wrists as you're going round, making sure you've got enough fluid there, making sure you don't become too dehydrated. But just all those basic things, all centered around really trying to keep core temperatures as low as possible and making sure that you're not overly dehydrated. Shorter races, I mean, it still does play a part, but probably not as much. Now it's not going to be scorching hot.
Yeah, and I think maybe even like the perception of core temperature as well is probably just as important with that, because ultimately,
definitely,
running for around 30, 35 minutes, as long as you get back down and you're in a safe way, you can properly rehydrate and recover from that process. So there's the team have got a coach's station up at the top, which is going to be really useful. And I think the strategy will just be to really cool off up there and sort of get yourself settled, calm that heart rate down, and then really focus on enjoying the technical downhill, and then emptying the tank across that final flat kilometre. But yeah, I think the British team are going to be using a lot of those cooling techniques in advance of the race. I also think that the race is quite early.
That's good.
On the Sunday.
Yeah,
they're also. I think George is the last to go at like 8:10 in the morning. So I think as well, it's kind of set up to kind of limit the impact of that, which I think is really important. Obviously, it'd be very different if you were setting off out in the heat of the day. But yeah, no, I'm excited, and I think, like you say, it's always concerning when you see stuff like heat waves, and particularly as the races get deeper into the summer, it's definitely much more of a consideration. But yeah, no, should be really good.
It's a really nice point. I'm going to kind of bring it all back round to the point we made about the start, about the timings, because obviously James and George are going to be out for massive miles different in terms of time.
I was going to say, how long is James going to be out for?
We think about 5.5, somewhere around there. I mean, we could be looking at 6 if it gets really warm or technical. But yeah, we're banking on sort of between 5.5 and 6. Anything inside is a bonus, right? But that's what we're looking at from a fueling perspective anyway. And the other thing to look at and to say here is, how do we work that out? Like, this is where we've been working together a lot as coaches and using our brains to get together. But the general rule of thumb for trail and mountain runners is, for every 100 meters worth of elevation, that is adding what we'd class as like a kilometer to the race distance, roughly. I'm going to use George's here as an example to kind of round this off as to how we do these calculations and what we've got to think about. So we said, look, the course distance is just over 6K. And just under 6K. We've got 400 meters worth of elevation. Yep. So we're looking at 400 meters. For every 100 meters we've got a K, that gives us 4K. So we've got 10K. We're expecting her to be out for around about 35 minutes or so to 40 minutes. Well, that is equivalent of 10K on the road. So that's where we get those calculations from. James and I use a thing called Munter rate to calculate his rate of travel, and that helps us dictate the fueling. But if you are thinking about doing trail races at home, it is worth considering that equation of like looking at how much elevation is in the race and have you applied that to the distance. It's not just as simple as, I'm going to go out and do 20K. It'll take me, a half marathon usually takes me 2 hours, so it's going to take me about 2 hours as well. If that's got 500 meters worth of elevation, that's like adding another 5K to that race distance. So you're going to be out for 5K longer than you would be on a flat half marathon. And that can impact fueling. If it's hot, it can impact the length of time you're out there for. What's that going to do to dehydration? It could impact your hydration strategy. It absolutely does. But also, if you just look at it from a time perspective, at Snowdonia recently, I could calculate that James was going to be roughly out for 2 hours 10, which is about marathon for him. He's 2 hours 20. I had Ailsa in the same race. So I was like, well, actually, Ailsa, you're going to be out for about marathon time. But for you, marathon time is about 4 hours. Like, that's two completely different kettles of fish there, 2 hours to 4 hours. So two different strategies within that, even with pacing. So there's lots of things to unpick when it comes to trail, whether it's a short, sharp race that's got steep elevation up and down, or whether it's those longer races. But hopefully there's a few useful tools there for you to take away. To wrap this all up, I want to really highlight the importance of having a coaching team, because one thing I've enjoyed is having the ability to talk to somebody in the office and have those little meetings and those little one-to-ones about planning. And this started right back at the start of the year, didn't it, when we looked at those trial races and we sat down. But let's just give people a quick insight into what did we actually do in those meetings? What did we sit down? What did we analyse? And how did we come up with training plans and different race strategies?
Great question. Well, I mean, first of all, you're looking at the event, the specific demands of the event. then maybe, and then also importantly, what your athlete's currently able to do, because that's almost like they're your parameters and what you've got to work with. For example, a more senior athlete might be able to handle more training load, and so therefore you've potentially got more opportunities there to, put extra elevation in or put an extra session in, or depending on what that looks like. I think then you're looking for, we really like then discussed into, well, what is the best way to access the type of effort that you would be able to expect on that within the event, but without it replicating the event, because there's no point trying to replicate the effort with distance duration effort each and every week. You're just going to fry yourself, right? So where can you get those kind of micro wins? How can you create intervals that are still specific without them being too much? Where does a kind of continuous run sit? And what are the kind of easy quick wins that you can build in and around those like key sessions to kind of supplement what exactly you're trying to achieve? And then I suppose it links to lots of things we talked about, but what's your athlete most familiar with, and what do you know that physically they respond really well off? Because ultimately, yes, we spoke a lot about the event and the conditions and the terrain and the features, but it's still, ultimately you're not far off if you probably put them in a line in terms of fitness. There's still a huge correlation in terms of finishing position and physical capability, and so you need to get them as fit as possible, and then as fit as possible on that terrain and working towards that event specifically. I think we started way back in January and spoke specifically about hill sessions. I mean, that's an obvious place to start, right? But yeah, I think almost questioning and probably coming in with like preconceived ideas of the types of sessions that I was very keen on setting, but using Lewis and Gemma as a benchmark as well, does that make sense? Is that a little bit too much? Is that a little bit too little? And you're almost like together refining your strategy and coming up with something that makes a lot of sense. I don't know. Anything to add in terms of how we worked? And
no, it's a brilliant description of how we did work. And like you say, it was almost refining your own beliefs and strategies with cross-checking with others around you. And similarly with myself and Gemma doing the same with you and other people as well. And I guess the point I wanted to highlight here is this is the same for like any event, any discipline, any terrain. Yeah. We do this a lot as coaches. We have our coaches meetings. This is what I think separates us from other coaching companies, is that we're getting all our heads together, we're upskilling, we're learning from each other, and we do this across the board. We wanted to do this episode to show you how we do work as a coaching company, but also celebrate our success, because I believe this is what is bringing us success. Is we've got a team of coaches now. We wanted to raise the bar when it came to professional coaching here in the UK, and I feel like we are doing that now because we're working together. We are collaborating as opposed to working as individuals, and that for me brings a standard up. It's just teamwork. I think the only thing I would have added in there is, and we just had a brief discussion around what do races look like going in. Is there any race opportunities there? Do they fit with the plan? Cross country, as we mentioned earlier, some road options, those type of things. But it was just a very enjoyable and good session to go through, even from our own development.
Yeah, definitely. And I think probably the two things that stick in my mind in terms of like the biggest things that you added to enhance that journey for myself and Georgia was, I remember quite soon on we had to make a decision as to whether we were going to go for one of the trial races or two. And I remember we sat down and we analysed some of the training, some of her perceived strengths, some of her actual strengths, and some of the results to date. And that kind of, I definitely felt that was a joint decision as to be, look, it'd be highly recommended to stick with one, and this should be the trial race that you go for because it's going to maximise your opportunity there. But then the other thing I remember was I think you went away and with some of the athletes went and did a particular session, more kind of threshold based on the hill. And I remember you came away and you said, it's probably just not hard enough, for the demands of what this fell race is going to be like. Perhaps we were approaching it too much like a 10K half marathon effort, whereas actually it's not. It's quite a fast 5K, fast furious effort up, and then it's more of a technical show of strength on the way down. And I think that's important, right? To be quite reflective and curious and always looking to improve your process and refine that as it goes on.
Yeah.
Hence the importance of planning, right? And you not running out of time. So,
yeah. And that comes back to the session planned was executed exactly as we wanted it to. It just the feedback from the athlete and me being in the session was actually, we got out of it what we wanted, but it probably wasn't hard enough to access that. So it was a really good learning for me. And again, we're always on this learning journey. Yeah, back to the point of picking the right race as well. I just, again, learned from a coach in the past who said, don't try and put all your eggs in different baskets if you've not yet mastered the one. Master the one first and then start thinking about, doubling up in events. But back to the point with Georgia, we just both said, didn't we, go fresh into that trial on the Sunday. If people have tired their legs out in the trial on the Friday, then you've given yourself a better chance. So, and that was a really wise decision in the end. So again, comes back to understanding the athlete, making sure that you do what's best for the athlete because they want to make a team, and not minimizing their chances by not seeing it as, there's two opportunities there to make a team, which would be the easy way to look at it. No, back yourself. Put all your eggs in one basket that we know is the best option to make that team, and go for it.
And be very certain about that. Nobody wants a coach that's uncertain and unsure about the decision making, right? So I think definitely the right decision, and just really excited ahead for the weekend.
Well, that's a nice point to finish, because nobody likes a coach that's uncertain. It comes back to trusting the process, trusting the coaching, the coach trusting the athlete. If you believe in that athlete, share that belief with them, because it gives them confidence. And if they see the confidence from you, it will automatically give them a whole heap of confidence. So we're going to end there and say best of luck to James and Georgia, who are representing GB this weekend.
It is live on Eurosport.
Nice. Yes, good point. Good drop in there, Jeff. Yeah. I'll be in the mountains in Austria, so I won't be able to get it because I'm supporting Gemma, so I might have to stream it somewhere on my Sky Go. But yes, if you want to check it out, then go onto Eurosport and watch it on there. It will be a great weekend of racing. Best of luck to anybody who's racing this weekend, no matter what the distance, what the event, what the terrain is. We hope you go well. And as always, we hope you've benefited from the podcast, and we hope you join us again in the near future. But for now, a big thank you from me.
And a big thank you from me. Best of luck, guys.
Keep enjoying your running, enjoy your training, and we'll see you all again very, very soon.